Jose, I'm going to start with you. Atlantic Sapphire's been very successful in listing and raising money. So tell us a bit about when did the metrics start to make sense for land-based salmon?
Well, I think in 2016, when we were able to consistently harvest 4 to 5 kilo fish, it was a key milestone. It turns out that in the process of innovating around our management of all our variables in that, we also managed to remove off flavor, and that was measured by market acceptance of the top restaurants and retailers. So that really was a period where growing that fish to commercial size weight at perfect flavor was old news, and it became about commercial scale up and risk mitigation.
So Ron, one of the keys I think to your technology is going to be marrying it with RAS, with land-based grow out, unless I'm wrong. So how do you see this sector developing, and to what level will that supplement the global supply of salmon? How much do you see land-based salmon playing a role going forward?
That's a good question, Drew. And obviously there's a tremendous opportunity. Aquabounty's technology takes advantage of the convergence of two technologies. One is the rapid development of modern water handling systems. That's the modern RAS that was been described this morning and discussed. And the second is the opportunity to also alter the growth rate and properties of the fish, which is something that we've focused on. So we've created a rapidly growing, more efficient salmon that can be grown economically in a land-based system. Whether you're using conventional fish or Aquabounty salmon, I think it'll present an opportunity to move salmon production in non-traditional locations, which will create opportunities for sustainability, because as I mentioned, lower transportation costs, putting the fresh food closer to consumers, lowering carbon footprint of production. And as long as the economics work, I think it represents a new opportunity to perhaps change the dynamics in the salmon industry, presenting new opportunities to feed the world for the next 30 or 40 years.
So Regin, how do you see this development towards land-based salmon, more local proximity to markets? When you look at other technologies out there, be it offshore, be it land-based, what do you see emerging that could eventually rival in cost or efficiency net pen?
I think that the development over the last 20 years clearly showed us that the market for salmon needs to grow. We see that there has been a stable growth, at least between 6 and 8% per year. And that's actually what drives us to find out how to supply more salmon. Who will be the winner in this game is very exciting to know. Only the future will declare. But we in Bakkafrost, we saw already back in 2013, when we declared our first 5 years investment program, that one of the ways where we could raise more salmon in the future was to find a way who created synergies between the way we already grow salmon today. So we knew that, for example, in the Faroe Islands, there are 21 fjords, and there are going to be more fjords in the Faroe Islands in the future. So how can we get these 21 fjords to be more productive? And the result of that study was to produce a larger smolt, so that instead of using 2 years for one generation of salmon in the fjord, we can reduce that to 1 year. And by doing so, we can use the already made investments much more efficiently. For sure, it's much more costly to produce salmon on land. You need much more capex, For example, the Strand facility that we are building at the moment is 30,000 cubic meters, which is the same size as the largest pens that we do. But the cost of this investment is around 1 billion NOK. The cost of one pen is maybe 5 billion NOK. So there is a tremendous difference in the capex level to invest on land. There will also be a big difference in the OPEX level, because we need a lot of electricity to pump the water around through the biofilters and everything. We could easily produce large salmon in this facility, but of course 1 billion in investment, 5,000 tons of capacity. So what we do is that we will increase the capacity with the already existing licenses, with the investments that we had already done, with these investments. So that's how we see a competitive advantage with this way of growing. So that's our strategy for the time being. I think that there might be other solutions out there, but at least I think that ours is the best.
Okay. One of the reasons that you chose to go towards larger smolts, and some of the other innovations that Bakkafrost has done on sea lice treatment as well, has been to mitigate these incredible costs that you mentioned, Malcolm, which are just shocking. When you see the level of profitability in the sector, it's even more shocking that the industry is still doing that well with all those losses. But tell us a little bit about the role that genetics is going to play in growth, in mitigating those losses. Number one, when are we going to start seeing major reductions in sea lice in particular? When will we see real progress in that? And are salmon farming companies willing to invest, in your opinion, in these new technologies?
Yeah, we're already seeing that. So we produce we produce stock that is resistant, partially resistant to sea lice today. And each year the breeding program tightens that, so it gets a little bit more every year. And we have a significant reduction in lice numbers on the, if you do a controlled trial, you'll see there's a significant reduction in lice numbers on the genomically selected fish for sea lice resistance. So that's already out there in the market, and it will continue to improve year on year as we go forward from here. I think the opportunity with sea lice is going to be a combining of amazing technology that's coming through the system now. So one of the things that we looked at with PD resistance was we looked at the effect of combining vaccine with genetically resistant fish, and we got a very clear 2 + 2 = 5. So you've got a major benefit, because you were, in effect, tackling two different biological pathways. The genetic resistance was taking one path, the vaccine was tackling another one, and the two were synergistic, and they produced a much bigger effect. I believe that we're going to see exactly that happen with vaccines for sea lice. Now, it's been the holy grail of aquaculture vaccine development, sea lice vaccines. But the new vaccine technologies are here now, and people are developing human anti-cancer vaccines. We've got vaccines that can do things we only dreamed about only a decade ago, and some of that technology will find its home in our big challenges in the aquaculture arena. So, in my opinion, that we will see combined technologies with animals specifically bred to take on that opportunity of the other technologies, and we will probably see very, very targeted nutritional approaches as well that enhance that. And the combination of those things will put us in a position where sea lice can be controlled. I think we're a lot closer to that than it seems if you go out and look at the situation on the ground in salmon farming today, where managing sea lice is a major effort. But I think actually the technology is moving quite rapidly, and we're probably a lot closer than people think.
Well, in addition to selective breeding techniques and the advances there, obviously there's some big advances in genetic engineering as well, Ron, and you've certainly taken your share of heat on this issue. That said, there's more and more companies, especially on the feed side, that are incorporating GM ingredients without the same kind of pushback maybe that there was a few years ago. So what's your take on that in terms of GE and how that might play a role in farm salmon going forward? And where are we with consumer acceptance? Do you see there being any tipping point at some point where consumers are not as rabid about it as maybe the NGOs are right now?
So you're not going to ask me any easy questions today?
No.
No, that's a very good question, Drew, and thank you. I agree with Malcolm. I think there's a tremendous opportunity. It's amazing, and I'll start at the back end of your question first. It's amazing what the consuming public will accept for medical advances in health and in treatment and prevention of diseases, prolongation of life, treatment of congenital diseases, even genetic analysis for prospective parents. If you apply that same technology to their food, you have an enormous reaction driven in large part by groups that are philosophically or culturally opposed, and by a public who really doesn't know where their food comes from. Having said all of that, we have a challenge, all of us, to meet the global food security needs of the next 30, 40 years. And conventional breeding, classical family studies are an important part of that and have contributed enormously to the improved productivity of all of our cultured species. However, as you mentioned, now with gene editing, conventional molecular genetics and molecular biology, both as diagnostic techniques for leading efforts in successful family breeding programs, as well as direct manipulation of genomes, present enormous opportunities to improve productivity, improve disease resistance, and improve the quality of the organisms that we culture for our food. So I think that's an enormous opportunity that we have, and I think the public is beginning to realize as they get more experience with some of these foods that it's a much more complex story than they've been led to believe. That these technologies can improve the quality of life, they can be effective in medical applications, and certainly I think they're beginning to accept their use in the introduction in foods. And I think that's a part of the future.
So going back to you, Jose, you mentioned some of the brand attributes of Atlantic Sapphire salmon, some of the ways that you'll be selling it. And yes, the farm salmon still has a stigma in the United States, certainly in the Pacific Northwest. We've seen what happened there recently. So do you feel like land-based production, made in the USA, locally produced product, is that going to be a message that can overcome some of the consumer negatives about farm salmon?
I think it's a combination of factors. It's definitely an ad. Local farm to table, from harvest one day, in-market the next, is something that's not readily experienced across the market. So when you add the other attributes, which are also important, fish have never seen a sea lice, no medicines, antibiotics, it drives the value proposition.
Regin, so what amount of energy, effort, R&D does Bakkafrost put into genetics? You mentioned it in your presentation that it's an important part of your history, but is that an area where the company will continue to put efforts, and to what end?
What I mentioned was specifically about a new program that we are setting up right now. You know that in the Faroe Islands, all our farming activities started in the 60s with a Faroese strain that was developed, and there was a governmental company that took the responsibility for this. Until 2012, this was what we based our operations on. Then Fiskeling, which is the Faroese company owned by the government, shut down, and we have based our salmon operations on imported eggs. Bakkafrost has decided that we are going to take care of this Faroe strain, and we are going to build a new facility to work with the Faroe strain. And we have got license from the government that we will have rights for the strain from 2021 and onwards. So that's what I specifically referred to. And I think that for Bakkafrost this is quite important, because we base our product and our brand on a Faroese story. We talk about sourcing local raw materials. We talk about catching fish in the Faroese fjords and producing a local salmon where we don't transport raw materials around the world, but we catch them locally and produce a salmon with a local taste. So to have our own genetics from a Faroese breed is also contributing to that story. So I think that in the salmon industry, when you talk about marketing and market development, you know, to develop storytelling, to develop some kind of passion about what we are doing is very important part of it. It's not just an industrial product, but it's something that also comes out of our heart. To produce a salmon in the Faroe Islands with a taste of the Faroe Islands is one of our goals.
When you see, when you look at some of the figures that Malcolm was mentioning, and obviously you're familiar with them, which of those factors to you are the biggest concerns, whether it's sea lice, whether it's disease? Are there any in particular that you see the salmon farming industry needs as a group to focus a lot more attention on?
Well, Bakkafrost is together with many of the larger salmon companies part of the GSI, and we were part of founding the GSI. And one of our tasks there has been to share knowledge about how can we reduce the risk on biosecurity with diseases and sea lice. That has been one of our main focuses since we started GSI. And we have shared a lot of knowledge between the companies and between countries. We have held seminars and we have held sessions with the companies inside and outside, and also to share to other companies outside the GSI. And for sure, this is one of our main possibilities to improve ourselves on this area, to find new solutions to reduce the risk for sea lice diseases, non-use of antibiotics, non-use of chemicals. That is one of our targets. Of course, first you need to set a target, and then you need some time to achieve the target. That's the process we are in at the moment.
Well, so you mentioned, of course, in a RAS system, you're not going to see a single sea louse, and that's true. However, not immune from other X factors that come along with any kind of farming. And certainly the Danish operations have experienced that. So how have you gone about making that case to investors with essentially proven on a pilot level, but certainly no major commercial scale? What are the questions you're getting, and how are you assuring them that this bet's worth taking?
Sure. Well, as a technology innovation company since 2011 in Denmark, we've been working with all our eggs in one basket. One unique water system. And every time we have an incident, we've lost the farm twice. Once was for biodisease, and we're a learning organization, and that led to significant investment in a firewall on our intake water. And we've never made that mistake again twice. Regarding last year's hydrogen sulfide intoxication, that was a design deficiency which we were aware of, and we have already incorporated new design in our expansion in Denmark, in our US plants, and improved our operating procedures, and we're just obsessive around that risk now. We're measuring it like never before, so learning from our mistakes, and we've made a lot of mistakes. But In the medium term and long term, it's really diversifying systemic risk. In other words, when we complete our expansion in Denmark in a couple of months, we'll have 2 independent water systems. So now your biomass is 50% exposed to a wipeout. And in the U.S., bringing phase 1 online, we'll have 8 independent water systems across the company. So now, all your eggs in one basket, we're going to have 8 baskets, 8 buses in the fleet. One breaks down. So, and I think our investors see that. And when I mentioned earlier that we're a risk mitigation company, we call it risk-adjusted CapEx. It might be $1 CapEx per kilo more to have a firewall, but your risk-adjusted CapEx in that system is way down. And it's the same around OpEx when we look at stocking densities, etc. And this business begs for scale. The larger the business, the lower the risk across the company. And this is what our investors and creditors are seeing.
I'm seeing you nodding your head there, Ron, and you've had some investors backing Aquabounty for a long time. Very patient investors, I would say. So I guess that's just part of the game when you're working with new technologies is for investors to understand that the timeline can be not just 3 to 5, it can be sometimes decades. But now that you've reached a stage where Aquabounty is actually producing product, what's the next phase for development for the company? Are you then looking at expansion downstream, or are these primarily to showcase the Aquabounty technology?
Our initial aims are to establish at scale, at commercial scale, the economic viability of Aquabounty systems. As I said, it's the convergence of the state-of-the-art recirculating aquaculture system technology and the genetic modification that allows the rapid growth phenotype and the improved efficiency. When we talk to banks and investors, and you're right, we've had people that invested with us 25 years ago because they believed, and we've always told them the truth. We told them that it would be difficult, and we've kept them informed along the way. That's been important in maintaining our credibility and maintaining their good faith. But as we go forward, what people wish to know now is, well, you're the pioneer. It's a nice story. True, you've been approved in 2 major regulatory regions, and you've done something that no one else has done, but you're still the first one. Can you do this at scale? And so we're in that prospect right now. We acquired a farm in Indiana, as you know, which will give us about a 1,500 metric ton capacity. We hope to start that up. In fact, the water's in the tanks and the biofilters are active now. We hope to stock it this year. We also built a smaller facility in Canada near our hatcheries where we'll have a 300-ton capacity. And that, again, is also more of a demonstration. That facility is built with observation decks, observation windows where people can see the fish, see the operation without actually going out and exposing the fish to any biosecurity issues. So we hope that by demonstrating that, we can demonstrate to investors, to new investors, and to investment banks that this is a technology that they can invest in. I was nodding my head partially because the systems, we're driven by SOPs, we're driven by management oversight, we're driven by triple redundancy in all systems. There is no such thing as an idiot-proof machine. Machines fail, people fail. But by building in redundancies and having management involvement and management oversight, you can prevent those from becoming catastrophic failures. And we believe that we've turned that into a system that can have real economic value. In our pilot facilities now, we're producing target scale fish at the times that we've predicted and the metrics that we've described, and we believe that we can do that at capacity, and that's the next milestone for us. Once we do that, then I think we'll have an opportunity to expand this on a much broader scale, not only in the U.S. and in North America, but also in other countries.
Thanks. So, Malcolm, in terms of articulating the growth potential in aquaculture to investors, tell us about the advantages of investing on the input side rather than the resource or biomass side of things, and are you seeing more interest in wanting to get exposed to the sector in that way?
Yeah. Well, I'm in favour of investors investing in both sides. I think that both aquaculture represents a unique opportunity today, which is very hard to see replicated somewhere else. You have fundamental growth drivers where you have a race towards healthy eating in the developed world. You've got improved livelihoods in the developing nations and in the southern hemisphere, which are largely fish-eating cultures. Down in the southern hemisphere, they're much more fish-eating than beef and chicken. And so you've got big drivers. People in the southern hemisphere wanting to feed their families better, and that means feeding more fish. And in the northern hemisphere, we want to feed our families better, to provide them with a healthier lifestyle. That means giving them more fish. Big fundamental drivers. And as we saw from the graphs earlier today, we're not going to catch that in the sea. That's peaked. At best, it's peaked. It may be in gentle decline, but it's definitely not going to go up to take up any of this increased demand. So aquaculture as a space is a very unique opportunity. The advantage of investing in the technology side of it is that alongside the very big opportunity of investing in fast-growing, sophisticated modern seafood companies, you get the chance to invest in technology that has patent protection, like IP, and that is high margin as well. Fundamentally, the technology side is a higher margin business, and so it adds another foil, another element to the investor's portfolio. So I think, but at the same time, taking advantage of this tremendous opportunity in the agriculture space. So I think the case for investment in both sides is very strong.
We do need to begin wrapping up, but I'm going to go down to you, Regin, and what I'd like you all to do is just talk a bit about growth, because obviously we've hit unbelievable highs on farm salmon prices recently. Whether or not that's sustainable, we shall see, but regardless, we are going to need some growth in the farm salmon sector if we're to meet the existing demand. Where's that growth going to come from, Regin?
That's a good question. If you look at the history over the past 20 years, we saw that in the 90s it was easy to maintain double-digit supply growth every year. We saw the growth was maybe double-digit and sometimes even more than 20%. In the zeros, we saw that growth came down to maybe 4 to 8%, maybe 10%. And now we seem to be stuck in a situation where it's very difficult to create supply growth more than 4 to 5%. Why is this? One of the reasons is that we are producing much more salmon. So to create 5% needs more volume now. Huh? And the other reason is that all the fjords are occupied. So we need to find other ways. So the way that Atlantic Sapphire are doing this is one of the ways. The way with larger smolts is one of the ways. Offshore technology will be one of the ways. But I'm afraid that all these ways will not give us double-digit growth. It will still be a lower growth compared with earlier. That's my best guess. And there are natural limitations where you can grow and how you can grow. And there are also more and more regulations in all salmon farming countries where the industry has become more and more matured and more legislations are controlling how to grow a sustainable salmon. And that's also positive. So that's why I think that we have gone from one phase into another phase.
So, Jose, just quickly your thoughts on where that growth is going to come from.
I think the long-term outlook for aquaculture growth is enormous. You look at it as a protein category versus beef, chicken, or pork. The consumption of the salmon is much lower than those categories. The feed conversion ratio is much superior for salmon. it's, and demand is going to continue to grow. The world's population will continue to grow. So the fundamentals are very attractive. It will come down to technology and execution, whether it's land-based or whether it's in genetics. These improvements in technology is going to drive the category.
Malcolm, your brief thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. I think that we'll see another dimension alongside the ones that Regin mentioned, which is the power of technology to reduce mortalities, increase growth, improve yield, improve feed conversion. In other words, allowing us to sweat our assets more, get more production out of the same assets. And I think that's going to be a powerful driver of growth going forward from here. And I think it's inevitable that we will see, new ways of farming salmon. I think that has to happen. The pressure to produce more salmon is going to keep going and going, which is why we've got the high prices we've got today, and I think why they're likely to be sustained.
Ron, your final thoughts.
It's hard to add to that list, but I think what I would add is the ability to grow salmon in a high quality, high protein source of food in areas that traditionally are unable to grow salmon will allow us to grow the market and create a more robust industry. There will always be cultivation in fjords, there will always be net pen cultivation, but for locations that don't have the luxury of the environmental features that have the cold water fjords and the long coastal waterways, we'll be able to put it outside large cities in the U.S., outside large cities in Canada, outside large cities in perhaps Brazil, Argentina, pick a country. And then there's always China, which we haven't talked much about. But the global opportunity for this market is, I think, significant. And the adoption and the implementation of new technologies, both engineering technology in RAS and genetic technology in more efficient, more rapidly growing, more productive fish, present us with a real opportunity to grow the global industry.
Gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. We'll have a round of applause.